Welcome to the Containment Zone. It begins with the cold. Not the kind that merely stiffens your fingers or turns breath to mist, but a deeper cold, the kind that grows from within your bones like frostbitten ivy. A kind of silence follows it too, heavy, intentional. The sort of stillness that feels like something is listening, waiting. Reports are always the same. Temperatures plunge in regions where no drop was forecast. Wind patterns twist in irregular spirals over remote settlements. Children begin to speak of dreams filled with footsteps crunching over frost. And in homes that dot the northern latitudes, in valleys blanketed with snow, in cabins carved into pine-covered hills, a scent takes hold. Something woody, burned, rotting sweet. The Foundation has never identified a precise trigger. SCP-4666 simply arrives. No breach, no portal, no transportation event. Only the lingering certainty in the mouths of those who survive that something had been standing just outside their door, waiting through the night. Its appearances are locked to the final 12 nights of the year, known across certain northern traditions as the midwinter nights. But SCP-4666 predates those terms. Predates language, some believe. The name Yule Man is simply the one that stuck, easy for children to say and for investigators to whisper. Its patterns, however, are far more ancient and far more cruel. Wherever it appears, a trail of Wendigo events is left behind, scenes drenched not in spectacle, but in aftermath. Always families, always isolated, and always the same number, 12, as though each visit must complete some ritual cycle, as though time itself is ticking down to a breathless conclusion that only SCP-4666 understands. The anomalies begin subtly. The family dog refuses to enter the living room. The firewood stack contains logs, no one chopped. Children speak of tall figures in the snow, waving. They often draw these shapes, not out of fear, but out of familiarity. Their sketches are consistent across thousands of cases. A gaunt humanoid with elongated limbs, draped in patchwork hides, with eyes that seem to drip from the page when ink is used too heavily. When these homes are eventually found, Foundation forensics teams report similar conditions. The chimney has been widened. Blueprints lead in, not out. The mirrors are all shattered, and in each shard, observers sometimes see reflections not of the room, but of a dense forest under a pale sky, where something old moves just between the trees. The most consistent evidence, however, are the gifts, left behind in the rooms of the youngest children, often unwrapped, often warm, often breathing. These gifts are always handcrafted, wooden toys carved with unsettling precision, doll-like figures made from hair and teeth, or more recently, mechanical devices that defy current technological understanding. Some remain inert, others activate sporadically, whispering nursery rhymes in languages unknown, or displaying imagery of the child's last moments inside a warped snow globe of perception. But most disturbing of all, by far, is the silence of the scene. Not a sound, not a single mark of struggle, just absence, as if the walls themselves agreed with what was happening, as if the Yule Man's presence had shifted reality into complicity. No alarms are ever triggered. No neighbors ever hear screams, only the wind howling like a lullaby spun backwards, and a feeling, buried in the spines of those who arrive too late, that someone is still watching through the frost on the window pane, that someone is still in there. The Foundation's first recorded contact with SCP-4666 dates back to 1788, but folklore stretches much further, buried in winter tales, pagan warnings, and pre-Christian rituals meant to appease the cold, not to survive it, to appease it. It is said in certain recovered scrolls that the Yule Man does not seek out his victims at random, but is summoned by attention, by the act of remembering him. He exists in inverse proportion to disbelief. The colder the world becomes, the more he is allowed to take shape. The less we question what might be lurking in the dark, the more room he has to grow. And for that reason alone, the Foundation made a decision. SCP-4666 must never be captured. To contain him fully would be to define him, to solidify his existence. And what is solid may walk further. What is real may follow everyone. So instead, they watch. They wait. They bury the reports. And every December, the heaters in Site-120 are turned up just slightly higher, not out of necessity but out of ritual, as if to whisper, "You are not welcome here. You are not welcome here." There is a photograph recovered from a Wendigo event in rural Finland, dated January 2nd, 1956. It is grainy, black and white. A blur of snowfall covers most of the image. But in the center, just behind a half-buried fence post, there's a figure. Too tall, too distant to be certain, but unmistakably looking directly at the camera, as if it knew, as if it had posed. The photo was taken by an 8-year-old boy named Arto, who had been visiting his grandparents for the holidays. When local authorities arrived, the house had no signs of forced entry. The chimney, however, was found disassembled from within. The only remaining resident was Arto, standing barefoot in the snow, his face locked in a smile so wide it tore the corners of his mouth. He did not speak again for the rest of his life. These are not isolated incidents. They are patterns, repeating like clockwork through decades, scattered across the globe wherever cold settles in with unnatural patience. The Yule Man has never spoken, and yet his language is consistency, a ritual not of chance or sacrifice, but of methodical presence, a cosmic intrusion into the everyday. He leaves behind fingerprints, not on surfaces, but on the psyche. One field operative described the interiors of an affected home as having the feeling of a held breath. Each room carried a tension that warped perception. Doorways looked slightly narrower than they had when first entered. Clocks ticked in reverse when observed from the corner of one's eye, and photographs rearranged themselves subtly until the same grinning figure appeared somewhere in each one, always distant, always watching. It is in the architecture that SCP-4666 leaves his clearest mark. In every structure visited, the Foundation observed similar spatial anomalies, extended hallways that led to blank walls, basements where compasses failed, and attic doors sealed from within by mechanisms unfamiliar to modern locksmiths. One such house, in Alberta, was later demolished, and inside its rubble, teens found an extra room that had never appeared on any blueprint. No doors, no windows, just 4 walls and a chair made of stitched leather. Inside the chair was a single lock of blonde hair, tied with black twine. It is the precision that haunts us, not violence, not gore, but design. SCP-4666 does not act randomly. Each movement seems carefully aligned with a tradition older than language. The gifts, for example, vary based on geography, but maintain a symbolic weight. In Eastern Europe, children were left dolls with mouths sewn shut. In Northern Canada, entire sculptures of ice shaped like family members, distorted only slightly, were discovered in front yards. One such sculpture was found melting from within, despite outdoor temperatures well below zero. In every case, the message is clear: he knows you. He sees what frightens you, and he wraps it in a bow. Perhaps the most chilling encounter on record occurred in 1999 in the Swedish town of Jokkmokk. 12 residents vanished from the same extended family over the course of one night. No sounds were heard, no calls for help were made. The last known image, captured by a security camera at the edge of their estate, shows a gaunt, naked figure walking calmly across a frozen pond, carrying a lantern made of bone, flickering with a cold blue flame. No footprints trailed behind him, as if the ice itself refused to remember. And herein lies the greater horror. SCP-4666 does not hunt. He is not chasing anything. He visits, like a distant relative whose face you don't recall but whose arrival you never question. He brings what he brings, and then he goes, leaving homes bent at angles not visible to the naked eye, leaving dreams that leak into waking life like sap from a wounded tree, leaving questions carved into the corners of consciousness, ones no answer can soothe. What does he want? Why children? Why 12? And why does it feel, increasingly, like each year his visits grow closer together? The Foundation has ceased sending agents into active Wendigo events, not because it is too dangerous, but because it is too structured. There is no fight, no capture, only observation of a mechanism already in motion. A mechanism older than history, one built from cold breath and endless repetition. The Yule Man doesn't come for the unworthy, he comes for the expected, he comes home. To describe SCP-4666 is to risk reducing it, and yet the Foundation has tried. Measurements taken from photographic distortion, pressure sensors, and surviving environmental data offer a creature standing well over 3 meters tall, with proportions that strain the human eye. Its limbs move not in jerks or spasms, but with an elegant instability, like a marionette operated by hands that understand pain better than physics. It is always described as bare-skinned, though not naked. Its surface is a shifting blend of gray flesh, calloused and rippling like leather pulled too tight. In some observations, frost grows directly from its shoulders and collarbone like invasive lichen. In others, the air around it steams even in sub-zero temperatures, as if reality itself struggles to remain cold in its presence. But the most consistent feature, and perhaps the most grotesquely memorable, is its face, or lack thereof. Where a face should be, there is a yawning smoothness, a patch of skin where subtle indentations suggest nostrils and the faint outline of a mouth, but no eyes, no pupils. And yet, survivors insist that it watched them, not visually, but from inside their thoughts, as if the act of being noticed had come from the back of their own skulls. There are teeth, though, rows upon rows, like the ridges of a saw, hidden behind layers of tissue that peel open when it speaks. If such a thing can be called speech, what it emits is closer to the memory of a sound, creaking wood, frozen soil cracking, or the sharp snap of a tree limb under too much snow. These utterances do not pass through air, but through thought, and they leave behind images, symbols, dreams. Some Foundation linguists believe SCP-4666 is not vocalizing at all, but transmitting mimetic payloads, carefully constructed narrative loops designed to root into the psyche and grow. These dreams often contain motifs, spirals carved into frost, towering figures watching from tree lines, or a pair of boots hanging upside down in the hearth of a fireless home. There are ritual patterns too. It always enters through a chimney, even if one does not exist. It leaves behind soot, melted wax, and a brittle scent of myrrh and blood. Sometimes, gifts are found wrapped in cloth made from skin or fur. Sometimes, the gifts are not objects at all. In one case, a child was discovered cradling a bundle of pine needles that whispered his mother's voice, on repeat, for 96 hours before falling silent. In another, a family's mirrors were found to reflect not their own likenesses, but an image of their dining room from the night before, replaying endlessly. In the loop, a figure stood watching from the hallway. It had no face, it never moved. But with each repetition, it stood slightly closer to the table. And yet, the anomaly's purpose remains unknowable. Some believe SCP-4666 is performing a ritual, one tied to a calendar older than the solar cycle. A myth made flesh, fulfilling its seasonal obligation not out of malice, but from instinct. Others argue that it is not performing anything at all, that we are simply witnessing the external rituals of an internal organism, like cells reacting to heat without understanding the concept of fire. Whatever its nature, it does not deviate. 12 homes, 12 children, 12 nights. It is never broken pattern, except once. During a Wendigo event in Yakutia, Russia, 2004, a family of only 11 was targeted. Upon investigation, it was discovered that a neighbor's infant had spent the night in the home. The child was later found swaddled in the snow, untouched, but curled around a note, written in ash on parchment made from unknown fibers. The note read, "One was not meant to see. One must be kept. The 12th will always come." The child, now a Foundation ward, speaks only in rhymes during December. He refers to himself in plural. And when asked what he remembers from that night, he simply says, "I watched him take himself apart and climb down into the fire." There is a terror in structure, a horror not born of chaos, but of clarity. SCP-4666 is not madness. It is not error. It is ritual, so ancient and complete that we only suffer it because we were always meant to. It is winter itself, wearing the skin of tradition, bearing a gift made of fear, wrapped in certainty. The more we try to trap it in understanding, the deeper into its roots we crawl. And somewhere, under the snow, its footsteps are already waiting. There is a phrase repeated by survivors, especially those exposed as children. The winter never ended, it just went quiet. It is not uncommon for trauma to linger in invisible ways, but Wendigo events have left entire villages altered, not by the act of violence, but by what remains after. Some settlements, like the town of Brunavik in Iceland, still exist on paper. They appear on maps, They receive mail, their census data is up to date, but Foundation aerial surveillance over the past decade has shown nothing but frost-blanketed ruins and crumbled wood foundations under permafrost. Brunevik, in truth, does not answer. No sound, no smoke, no heat signatures. And yet, a Foundation mobile team dispatched to the site in 2018 found faint signs of human presence. Freshly disturbed snow and perfect boot patterns leading nowhere, meals half prepared in long frozen kitchens, and most disturbingly, a tape recorder in a child's bedroom still running on failing batteries. The cassette contained only silence, except for a point 2 hours in where a voice, elderly, dry, whispers, "He doesn't leave, he listens." The voice did not match any known resident of the town. In rural Vermont, another phenomenon emerged. Families displaced by Wendigo events often described an inability to remember the actual night of SCP-4666's visitation, not from repression, but from something deeper, a corruption in memory itself. One woman, 34 at the time, stated under amnestic-resistant interrogation, "I remember tucking my daughter in. Then she was gone. But I don't remember the gap between good night and the scream. It's like my brain blurred forward, like someone skipped a scene. And the air in the room, it had a taste, like rusted pennies. Like something was being exhaled behind me." Civilian exposure tends to follow similar sensory motifs. The taste of copper, the scent of wax and blood, the soft cracking of old wood even when standing on concrete. But more disturbing are the auditory reports. Countless survivors, from vastly different regions and cultures, report hearing the same phrase in different languages, a low, whispered chant that seems to leak from vents, snowbanks, or the walls themselves. 12 below. 12 arrive. 12 will not leave. The Foundation has cataloged this as Auditory Marker 4666A, a mimetic incantation with no known linguistic origin. Attempts to isolate its waveform produce interference. One recording, when slowed to a quarter speed, revealed a secondary layer beneath the chant, a child's laughter. Not joyful, not cruel, but empty, like something mimicking joy without ever having felt it. One community near Leistek, Norway, developed what they called the hearth practice. Every December, the townspeople gathered in silence and filled each chimney with bricks, stones, and, in some cases, bones of animals buried years earlier. They slept in barns or cellars, leaving their homes uninhabited for 12 nights. Foundation agents embedded in the town observed no manifestations for 3 years. But in the 4th year, every chimney was found hollowed out from within, the bricks rearranged into childlike towers stacked on every doorstep. A single note was left, burned into the town's only wooden church altar. "You do not close the door. You only forget how many windows you have." After this, the population of Leistek declined by 87%. Most were not found. Those who remained began to refer to the 12th day of Christmas as the Hallowing. It is not a creature the world fears, it is a recurrence. And that is what makes SCP-4666 so insidious. He is not merely a threat to individuals. He alters the context of existence. After an encounter, reality feels rewired, as though houses become too quiet, snow too deep, and children's dreams too precise. The Foundation's own personnel, especially embedded Class C agents, have experienced long-term cognitive effects, waking up in places they do not remember walking into, drawing spirals unconsciously, or, in 2 known cases, carving the number 12 into the underside of their desks with fingernails. One agent, Agent Mathers, entered containment voluntarily after 3 nights of hearing sleigh bells in his earpiece during unrelated missions. When questioned, he wept and said only, "It's not the sound that's the problem, it's that I could hear it moving away." And I was disappointed. Wherever SCP-4666 touches the world, something is taken. A child, a moment, a sense of continuity. And what is left in return is not horror, not even fear, but a silence that hums with certainty, as though the snow itself remembers who lived there and who didn't, and who still walks inside the walls. There had always been patterns. SCP-4666, for all his aberrant properties, behaved as something akin to seasonal, a predictable recurrence, bound to a window of time and a certain demographic profile, children under the age of 9, rural or remote settings, midwinter. And yet, on the 27th of July, midsummer in the Northern Hemisphere, An incident occurred in a coastal research facility in Greenland, a place with no permanent population under the age of 16, where no families had lived in over a decade and where daylight during that time of year persisted for over 18 hours. That evening, the facility's auxiliary power systems failed for exactly 1 hour and 44 minutes. During this time, security cameras looped a fragment of static interspersed with the image of what appeared to be a tall, emaciated humanoid moving through the maintenance corridors. The figure moved as if underwater, slow, with each motion trailing behind like smoke in a vacuum. It passed in and out of existence between frames, never seen turning, only appearing progressively closer. On-site agents reported nothing at the time. The disruption was only noticed during a routine data sweep. But when personnel interviews were conducted 3 days later, inconsistencies emerged. A junior technician named Vasquez, who had never left the site during the power loss, recounted, "I remember thinking the temperature dropped. I could see my breath, but the thermostat read 22 degrees C. I turned off my monitor for a second, just to rest my eyes, and when I turned it back on, someone had written the number 12 across every open tab, even on the command line. Just 12, 12, 12. I unplugged the terminal, glowing. The event was classified as 4666 breach Theta, the first known off-season occurrence. And more disturbing than its break from seasonal pattern was its location, Greenland, a place SCP-4666 had never manifested in before. A place with no known witnesses, no families, no context, which led Foundation analysts to an unsettling hypothesis. The creature was no longer tethered to ritual or repetition. He had begun to explore. In the wake of the breach, minor containment failures began to ripple across neighboring sites, not of their own anomalies, but of the minds assigned to them. Staff reported nightmares of windows in their own homes being opened from the inside. A senior doctor's 8-year-old daughter began to draw the same figure, hunched and towering, in every holiday card, despite never being exposed to any knowledge of SCP-4666. The images were eerily similar to accounts from unrelated victims thousands of kilometers apart. When the drawings were submitted for analysis, the ink used on them, originally just black pen, began to flake, revealing an underlying red compound with biochemical properties resembling both hemoglobin and soot. The Foundation's Memetic Division, under order of Dr. Callis, cross-referenced cultural records, folklore, and indigenous traditions. Patterns of a winter demon were easy to find, but the key discovery came from comparing survivor reports of the smell SCP-4666 leaves behind. It wasn't just the scent of wax, bone, and smoke, it was cedar. And cedar, in ancient burial rites across dozens of unconnected civilizations, was used not to honor the dead, but to anchor spirits to the land. The implication, SCP-4666 might not merely be an ancient predator. He might be the byproduct of a summoning never fully undone. And his movements, predictable until now, were the residue of a half-finished ritual playing out across centuries. So the breach in Greenland wasn't a deviation, it was a continuation. A misstep in a long, slow march to completion. Further investigation revealed something worse. Every recorded location of SCP-4666 manifestation, when plotted against a timeline dating back to 1784, formed an expanding spiral. The epicenter? A now submerged monastery in northern Estonia, destroyed in an avalanche whose survivors all vanished during the following winter. Within that monastery's ruins, archival records described a figure known only as Suniaisa, Old Father, the White Breath, the Frozen Gaze, a spirit summoned not to protect the land, but to purge it. And it is written, in a language only now reconstructed, "He who comes with the 13th frost is not born, but repeated. The world will gift him 12 openings and one final gate." The phrase appears in only one other place, etched into the bone of a femur found buried in the foundation of a modern suburban home in Nebraska, uncovered after a Wendigo event left 3 missing and 1 survivor who could only speak in rhymes. The spiral continues, and if what the Foundation fears is true, SCP-4666 is not done. He is approaching something, a culmination. The night the threshold lied wasn't a singular breach, it was a step. There had always been confidence in ritual, confidence in geometry, confidence in protocol. That confidence died in the hands of Site-24's ethics liaison, who, after reviewing the last 12 recorded appearances of SCP-4666, filed a resignation written entirely in blood, but not his own. It belonged to 5 deceased Level 2 researchers whose remains had been sealed in cryostasis 2 years prior, their security clearance long since revoked, their DNA never cleared for access to his wing. The incident was labeled a symbolic protest, but no one spoke the phrase aloud. The Foundation's internal term for SCP-4666 had always been Yule anomaly. Simple, clinical, but in the weeks following the breach at Greenland and the spiral projection analysis, internal memos began to use a different term, subconsciously, as if infected by suggestion: the collector. And he was collecting. This much was clear. Objects found at manifestation sites, while initially believed to be symbolic artifacts, dolls made of sinew, melted wax horses, broken crib frames, were found to possess shared biometric residues from multiple timelines, as if each object existed across fractured branches of causality. One child's thumbprint found on a toy had a 12% genomic deviation from her living self. It wasn't a token. It was proof that SCP-4666 was peeling away versions of reality, harvesting the ones most susceptible to memory, to myth. His appearances weren't merely events, they were cultural reassertions, recursive insertions into collective trauma, and so the Foundation panicked. The first response was to update the Scranton reality anchors, attempting to overlay stability fields over known manifestation zones. But after the third deployment in Belarus, the SRA devices stopped functioning and emitted, for 13 seconds, the sound of a child singing in a language no linguist could decode. The second response, Class W anti-memetic reformatting. Agents were deployed to entire villages with cognitohazard filters and memory compression devices designed to delete knowledge of SCP-4666's appearance. These operations failed not because of resistance, but because the memory was already missing. Witnesses remembered their homes, their families, even the shape of their grief, but no one could recall what, exactly, they had forgotten. Dr. Kellerman wrote, "We are not deleting memories. We are deleting something that deletes." This was followed by the third response, containment via narrative overwrite. Utilizing media infiltration cells, the Foundation attempted to saturate global culture with revised Yule Man myths, transforming the entity into harmless folklore, hoping to mask SCP-4666's imprint by mutating his identity. Children's books, cartoons, and streaming horror series were seeded with 1,000 contradictory versions. But then, a problem emerged. In every adaptation, no matter the studio or country, the creature eventually began to draw closer to his original description. The scripts rewrote themselves. Digital files glitched. Actors improvising lines without prompting began describing the same empty eyes, the same cracked fingernails, the same soot under the nails. Narrative overwrite had failed. The Foundation pivoted to its last defense, preemptive containment by belief erasure. Sites once active in SCP-4666 research were shut down. Personnel with exposure histories longer than 6 months were rotated into disinformation projects or issued amnestic-grade sedatives. Archives were burned, logs were wiped, but this erasure did not silence him. In fact, it seemed to quicken him. Dr. Halvorsen, the final specialist assigned to Operation Wendigo Red, reported that each deletion attempt was followed by a spike in dream-related phenomena across multiple Foundation sites: technicians drawing crooked pine trees, linguists humming unknown hymns, cleaning staff claiming their children had red eyes in the morning. In his final recorded message, Halvorsen whispers, "We are not watching him. We are remembering for him. Our work is his altar. Our suppression is his prayer." The Ethics Committee issued a rare intervention. They requested that SCP-4666 no longer be contained, but respected, treated as a global emergent force beyond anthropocentric comprehension, a blind spot in cultural recursion, a god neither summoned nor banished but assembled from collective winter grief. This was the first and only time the word God had been permitted in an SCP classification file. In a closed chamber, 7 senior overseers voted on whether to reclassify SCP-4666 as apotheotic, a term reserved for entities not of this world, but made by it. The vote passed. He was no longer listed as anomaly, he was listed as a consequence. There is an old house they never map. It appears in no coordinates, on no satellite registry, no urban plan, no census, yet it stands, endlessly wherever the snow falls deepest. Its wood is blackened by frost, the porch sagging like a mouth of rotten teeth. Windows stare outward, not from, and the chimney, no matter how calm the air, spills a thin line of smoke as if the fire inside never stops feeding. Children call it the winter house. Adults pretend not to hear them. They say it arrives in the dreams of those who've come too close to him. Victims, observers, archivists, those who dare to document SCP-4666 too long, and when it arrives, it does so without transition. You are already inside, and you cannot remember opening the door. The scent is the first betrayal, a copper sweetness, as if someone has roasted iron in pine cones over a fire made of regret. The walls weep sap, but it smells like blood. The wallpaper pulses faintly, as if breathing beneath its pattern. There are no footsteps, only the sound of something shifting upstairs, dragging what might be a sack, what might be skin along the floorboards, a creak here, a thump there. Each sound calculated to remind you, you are not alone. You are never alone. It was Dr. Ahmed Site-120's lead psychologist who coined the term compelled memory syndrome after her own exposure to one of SCP-4666's archival logs. She began dreaming nightly of the house, but worse, her children did too, despite never hearing of it. In her final report, found scribbled in charcoal across her office walls, she wrote, "The house is not a place, it is a promise. A space that grows wherever belief is left unattended. And that is the terror, isn't it? That we do not need to witness him to carry him. That SCP-4666 does not need to walk through walls or crawl from shadows or bite with teeth, because he arrives in silence, riding on the back of human ritual like a parasite. There was a time when horror required blood. Now, horror simply requires memory. It is believed that SCP-4666 feeds on patterns, on the endless loops we perform each winter. Rapping presents. Lighting candles, singing the same songs our grandparents sang, each syllable passed down like a prayer wrapped in sugar and paper. We do this because it comforts us. He watches because it binds us. No site can contain a song, no wall can hold a dream, no protocol can anticipate a myth. And so the Yule Man is not locked away. He is waiting for the silence in your home, for the hour after midnight, for the night you forget to check the chimney. The Ethics Committee has since retracted all claims of containment. What remains is only a set of notes, and a phrase etched into the margins of his file, not by any researcher, but scratched there by a janitor who never spoke again. We do not summon him, we remember him, and that is enough. So if you've heard bells where none should ring, if you've seen a tall shadow at the edge of a frozen yard, if a gift appears beneath your tree that no one admits to placing, do not unwrap it. Do not speak, do not move, because some traditions were never meant to end, and every step now echoes louder than the last.